Well, welcome everyone. I am glad that you're all joining us. My name is Joe Fain. I'm the President and CEO of the Bellevue Chamber of Commerce. I know we've got a lot of interest in today's webinar and a lot of interest in trying out some of these new technologies to be able to take some important information and bring it to each of our members. And then of course, anyone else who's able to join us here today. We launched this idea just day before yesterday and put the information out yesterday morning, and we've already had 250, 300 folks that have signed up to join us. And so I'm very grateful that you're taking your time to be with us, and hopefully you find today's program valuable. We also have a number of others that we'll be doing as part of our series over the next couple of weeks. One on telework and understanding what kind of tools, technologies, and best practices can help you succeed at home. One on cybersecurity, as we've seen an increase in threats presented by spammers and folks that are after our resources. One on nonprofit support, where we'll bring in some of the folks from the nonprofit community to tell the community how you can get involved to help. Economic outlook, education and childcare, all of the major issues that each one of us are facing during these unprecedented times. I'm very heartened that you've been able to join us. I've also been very proud of the community's response, both with our local elected leaders as well as the community at large. And the Bellevue Chamber, and I know every chamber around the state, is ready to help our small businesses succeed and get you not only the information, but the tools and resources to get through this time together. We're honored to be joined by a number of great panelists today to talk about some of these important issues that are facing both our community and of course our businesses. We'll be joined by Council Member Claudia Balducci, who is the chair of the King County Council, leading the effort on public health here locally. Mark Costello is the Assistant Director for the Small Business Administration in the Seattle office. He's fielding a lot of questions about how we can get in line for some of the federal relief and stimulus dollars, and I know that his presentation is going to be very valuable for each of us. Nick Demerice, who is the Director of Public Affairs for Washington's Employment Security Division, hopes to join us as well, talking about ways that we can help our employees succeed at this time, particularly for the many employees that have never found themselves looking for support resources and some of the programs that the Employment Securities Division offers. And then finally, the District Representative, Thomas Mayo, from the Office of Congressman Adam Smith, will give us a little bit of a peek behind the scenes at the federal level to understand what's coming through the pike, as federal action has been congressional action has been very swift over the last few days. To kick this off, though, I'm very proud to invite and welcome the former mayor of Bellevue and an extraordinary public servant here serving as the chair of the King County Council. Welcome, Council Member Balducci.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for inviting us and for putting this all together. This is really great. I want to apologize in advance. The downside of the home office is that I have got a currently sleeping puppy, but she can wake up at any moment. So we hope we get through this without hearing from her. Hi, everybody. And from King County, as Joe signaled, is really our lane in this is responding to the epidemic itself. We have public health, community and human services, and a whole bunch of regional basic services that need to go on during the epidemic, even with the lockdown, like transit and wastewater and solid waste. And so that's where we have been focusing our efforts mostly to date. And I wanted to try to give you an update on what I know from public health about the current state of the spread and our response, and then just a little bit about what King County is doing to try to help people through this time, and then take questions. So I don't have an update yet today. It comes out once a day from public health, but as of yesterday, we were reporting 562 confirmed cases of coronavirus. That was 44 more than the day before, and 56 deaths. That was 10 more than the day before. And of those, 35 of them were associated with the original outbreak in the Life Care Center of Kirkland. So it's obviously a growing and very sobering set of statistics. Public health continues to project that the number of cases will double every 5 to 7 days. But I have heard some folks start to talk about the fact that it might be going faster than that. And you all will undoubtedly have seen lots of charts and graphics on the concept of flattening the curve. Originally, the approach from public health was containment. track each and every case, do a contact investigation, find everybody that had been infected, everyone they had been in contact with, and try to contain the virus. Although there's been no formal announcement, it's clear that our approach is now turned to trying to limit the speed of the spread of the virus throughout our community so that we keep the number of cases at any one time below the capacity limit of our healthcare system. And just for a little dose of reality, we're seeing the healthcare system really start to strain now. Obviously, with the first outbreak occurring so heavily in Kirkland, there was a lot of strain put on Evergreen Hospital first. And we've seen cases there. One of the original surgeons who had been responding to those cases is now himself in critical condition. And we're going to see a whole bunch more of that. So that's the reality, is that people will start to get sick. Our first responders will be under strain, and we need to keep the number of cases low enough that the system doesn't collapse, because when it collapses, that's when you see things like we saw in Wuhan and in Italy, and we're trying to avoid that spike of cases out of control. The downside to those on the call who are worried about how are we going to, get through this time, is that if that strategy succeeds, it extends the length of time that the outbreak is going on. It'll keep the number of cases lower, but they will go on for longer. And so the last estimate I heard was that we won't really know if we've hit the peak or not for at least 4 weeks. And if you think about it, a peak is the middle. So you're talking about 4 to 8 weeks of time that we are going to be hunkering down like this potentially. And I think people just need to start wrapping their brains around the fact that this is not a 2-week adventure for us. We're going to be working on it in this way for quite a while. So let me talk a little bit about what King County is doing now in response. I think many of you will have heard that we are busy trying to stand up what they're calling evaluation and recovery sites. These are places where people can go when they need to be isolated and they can't be in their homes, or they don't have a home. There are currently 8 of those that have been identified. 2 or 3 of them have been stood up already, and they're starting to work on getting more. These are places they will serve different functions, but they're places where people can go if they've tested positive and they need to wait out to see if they get sick, being outside their home, not infecting folks really at high risk, like if you have a senior in your home. They will be for quarantine, and they will be for recovery, and these have to be in different locations. So we've seen on the east side, they've identified 2 sites. Well, yeah, 2 sites, unless you count Shoreline as the east side. One in Bellevue at the Eastgate area, which will be a large tent for congregate isolation, and one in Issaquah, where we purchased a hotel. Neither of those are functional yet, but they're coming, and we're looking to have to stand up very quickly about 3,000 beds at all these different locations, so that work will be ongoing. And the challenge for us as government is we're used to doing public processes around this. We have no time for any of that. We're just moving as quickly as we can. We have passed an emergency declaration, which gives quite a bit of power to the executive to move and do what he has to do. And we approved a funding package of $28.2 million. Most of this is for response. It's for the isolation sites I talked about. It's for coordinating the regional responses, distributing guidance, doing communications, ensuring homeless shelters have the ability to provide the isolation and staff they need, and funding for outreach and communications, because keeping people educated is going to be very important. 2 days ago, the sheriff announced that they're going to halt evictions, enforcement of evictions, residential evictions, until further notice. That was before the governor announced the moratorium on evictions. We are advocating for a property tax delay, but we have not heard on that because the property tax deadline is coming up, and we would like to push that out for at least 30 days to give people some time to deal with the new normal. We're working up some proposals within our own lane to try to do some financial support of businesses that we know are suffering, but they will be very small at the county compared to what the state and especially the feds can do. So just wrapping up, I would say a few things. When I think about this, I think none of us have really been through anything like this since probably World War II, where there was something on the home front that caused us all to have to come together and change our lives so dramatically for the good of a cause. And that's what we're being asked to do right now. We're really all in this together. I hope that we can help with information, but the truth is there's going to be a lot of need for folks to start thinking about how do they act independently? How do they take guidance? And if it's not really 100% clear what the guidance means, implement it the best way you can. And that's going to be a bit of a struggle. We're not used to that. And the final pitch I will make is you all as business people are critical to us weathering this storm to the extent you can. And I know that that is hard for many. I'd ask businesses to follow the lead of some of our larger employers in making sure your employees can obey the isolation, the social distancing, work from home if they can, try to find some way to keep them in a paid status at some level if they can't, because what we don't need is a whole bunch more people becoming homeless during the middle of this crisis. So I'm going to stop there. I want to thank you again for having me. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Council Member. It's great to have you on here. We do have a couple of questions that are coming in, and I want to invite everyone who's online with us to click the Q&A button and type in your question, and we'll try to get to that. And of course, if you have specific questions about how we can help you directly, please email us, staff@bellevuechamber.org, and we're happy to pass those questions along directly to any of our panelists that are here today. So look forward to having those. One of the great questions that we just received actually from one of our great leaders in the city of Kirkland is about redeploying of folks that might be underutilized right now because they're not at work or because they've got because they're on home isolation or that their offices are closed. Has there been any of that to help with setting up any of these recovery sites and any work with the private sector on redeploying those resources?
So that's a great question. And there may come a time when there's a call for people to come out and volunteer and help. We're trying to put up resources where people can volunteer. The United Way has got some of that online. If there are people who can do things, they are trying to connect folks with opportunities to do work. Right now in the county zone, the main stretch we have is nurses, doctors, and communication specialists who can speak public health fluently. And so if you've got people like that, give me a call. But we are working, one of my colleagues actually has a proposal to put together a way that we can actually push out volunteer opportunities, and we will certainly share that with you when we have it up and running.
One other question before we move on to our next speaker is about the supports for some of the folks in our community that are undocumented or are having, that have long had an inability to access some of the public services, or there's a fear around accessing public services. Has there been any specific outreach to those communities?
Yeah, well, we have, that's a great question. And we allocated up to $1 million in emergency funding for outreach specifically to communities that are hard to reach for one reason or another because of language barriers, because of that kind of fear you mentioned. And we're going to be standing up a really strong effort to get out into those communities to make sure people understand what they're being asked to do, get the response they need from a health perspective and an economic perspective. And that was one of the first things we did in our early emergency package, because we know that it's hard under the best of circumstances. By the way, we also have a census going on right now. So to the extent y'all can push out messages for people to fill out the census, might be the last thing on people's minds, but we still need to get everybody to fill that out.
That's a great reminder. Thank you so much, Councilmember, for joining us. We look forward to setting up another one of these with you soon. Have a great day. Next, we're going to be joined by Mark Costello. He is at the point of the spear right now with the Small Business Administration. He's been there since 1987, and we know that his expertise is going to be critically important to many of the businesses that are affected by this. Mark, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Joe. I really appreciate the opportunity to take a couple minutes and speak to the group, talk a little bit about what SBA is doing in terms of providing immediate assistance to the small businesses that are being impacted by this current situation. Earlier this week, we were able to stand up and make operational and available to small businesses in Washington State SBA's Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. So what this is an opportunity for small businesses who are being impacted by the current economic situation to make application directly to the Small Business Administration for economic injury relief loans. This is different than the traditional SBA loan that you may have heard about, which is generally financing made available from lenders, banks in the community, and SBA typically would provide a guarantee. These loans are not like that. They're in fact direct loans made by the Small Business Administration. And the idea here is we recognize that there's an urgency to getting funding out to shore up the small businesses that are being so dramatically impacted. And I think that this is certainly going to be one of probably several tools that are going to be employed to accomplish that feat. The idea just basically is we actually have an electronic portal available that loan applicants will be able to access. It's up right now, in fact. I think that Olivia was going to make this available in the chat. But I want to just bring your attention to that. If nothing else, I want those business owners in the audience today to be thinking about this. If you hadn't heard of it already, it's disasterloan.sba.gov and then /ELA. And the ELA is electronic loan application. So again, disasterloan.sba.gov /ELA. So the idea here is that with a relatively modest batch of documents being required on behalf of a small business applicant, you will be able to request funding from SBA, in some cases for as much as $2 million. There's no minimum loan amount under this program. The interest rate on the loans is fixed at 3.75% for for-profit businesses. And unlike our traditional lending programs, it's also available to certain nonprofits. The interest rate for nonprofits is actually lower. It's 2.75%. But the bottom line here is that this is intended to bridge the gap. So what you should be thinking about as a potential loan applicant is, what is it going to take for you to essentially cover your operating and fixed expenses for the duration of this current situation. I know that it's difficult to anticipate how far out that's going to go. I believe that the disaster parameters indicate or will allow you at least to go out to the end of May. But what we want you to be thinking about is projecting out, what is it going to take to keep your doors open, to make payroll during the time of this current crisis. The way that you will be able to substantiate and support your loan request typically is going to be based on historical operations. So for example, if you're looking for $500,000, SBA is going to want to kind of know why. So you would want to look at the same period of operations, for example, during 2019 or 2018 to substantiate your loan request. Ultimately, a lot of businesses are going to receive assistance through this program. Right now, as you can imagine, the demand is starting to ramp up pretty dramatically as more and more states become declared disaster areas under this program. But SBA is attempting to utilize technology and all of our resources to be responsive and treat this as the urgent situation that it is. One of the things that I learned today, which was very encouraging, is that we are employing kind of some streamlined approaches in the loan underwriting that weren't even typically or historically utilized. So the bottom line is that for loans up to as much as $500,000, the documentation requirements are really relatively modest. The idea here is SBA is going to try to approve your application to the extent possible. There may be cases ultimately where somebody, because of extremely poor credit, for example, or maybe because it's too large of a business, might not qualify for SBA financing, or maybe it's somebody that has tax problems and isn't able to work out an arrangement with the taxing authorities. Those are situations that could be problematic, but I believe that our intent as an agency is to figure out how to make these loans work and how to get them out as quickly as possible. One of the nice features here is that while we're trying to push money out to the small businesses as quickly as possible, they're going to be structured loans that will allow you guys as small business owners to pay them back in as modest of a fashion as possible. In other words, SBA is not looking to immediately start extracting payments on these loans. You're going to have a 1-year moratorium on payments from the get-go, from the outset, and the loans are going to be termed out in some cases at 15 years and in other situations as much as 30 years. SBA will use the maturity as a way to demonstrate or substantiate your ability to repay the loan. So if you had a viable operating business up until 4 or 5, 6 weeks ago, whatever the case was, you should be able to, under most circumstances, make the case and give SBA what they need in order for SBA to get you the funding through this program that you need to bridge the gap during this difficult time frame. So bottom line, disasterloan.sba.gov/ELA. I also gave Olivia a handout that I hope she's going to be able to forward on to all of the participants here today that talks about some of the other resources that are available to small businesses through SBA and its partner organizations. But for today's purposes, I really wanted to talk about the availability of this economic injury disaster loan as a tool to address the immediate financing needs of all of the small businesses in our area, in our state, and around the country. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Joe, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Mark, thanks so much for that information. We've got a lot of questions that are coming in on the line. One that jumps out quite a bit is how fast can folks expect to have from the time they apply to the time that they are able to pay their employees?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we've been told people should program in 30 days. So what that will look like is essentially 3 weeks, calendar weeks from the time of application to the time of a decision, 5 days or so to get documentation out and signed electronically, and then funding within 5 days of that. So I think realistically, and I think one of the nice things that's happening, if there were a silver lining here, is that we're at the kind of the beginning of this process. So the folks from the state of Washington and central Puget Sound area that are getting applications in, you're going to be at the top of the line, the front of the line, the beginning of the queue. And so while we might ultimately encounter some capacity issues, I think right now is a great time to be getting these applications in.
That's great. And we want to make sure that everyone knows, not only are we putting that link in the chat thread of this, we'll also have it on our resource page at bellevuechamber.org. We've got a growing list of resources from nonprofit groups to small business administration resources, employment securities. We're collecting all of those, making sure they're getting up on our website so that you can access them all in one place. We've talked a lot about the loan program here, but there's a lot of questions about grant availability. Is the SBA operate any direct grant programs that might apply to both for-profit and nonprofit, or is that something that's really being considered in the current stimulus package?
Yeah, so as a standard operating process, we do not have grants for small businesses, Joe. I believe, or what I'm hearing is that there are a lot of different tactics being considered as part of the federal legislation and federal response. I would just simply encourage folks to keep their eyes and ears open. The handout that I provided to Olivia has Twitter links from SBA and other links to ongoing program information that might become available. So you know, anything's conceivable, I think, in the current environment, and it is possible that there may be something other than debt financing out there available through the Small Business Administration or through the states from the federal level. So stay tuned on that.
So SBA does more than just the direct grant programs. It's also got a lot of communications out in the community, understanding business issues and communicating them back to our federal representatives. Are there any business regulations or changes to requirements from businesses that SBA is advocating for at this time to reduce some of that burden and allow the economy to continue along?
Right. You know, as far as that, I think that is an ongoing process, and through our Office of Advocacy, I think that there has been a pretty strong push to try to eliminate unnecessary and burdensome regulations over the last 3 years. Certainly, that's been an area of focus under the current presidential administration. And I think there have been already probably some significant gains made in that regard. But I think what we're looking at right now is maybe understanding that the rules are as they exist, but are there ways that we can temporarily look at them a little bit differently, possibly modify them? An example of that would be something that we've been working on a little bit with some of our lending partners, with businesses that have existing SBA guaranteed loans, and the need that those same businesses have for relief under the terms and conditions of those existing loans. So we're looking at our regulations and rules and policies around leniency that lenders might have to grant deferments to those businesses, and trying to interpret those rules and policies in a way that goes a little bit outside of the bounds of what might have typically been considered to be prudent. I think it's interesting to note, in fact, we saw something, communication from the FDIC along these same lines, indicating that that lenders who employ a level of leniency in terms of providing relief to their small business and medium-sized business borrowers are not going to be scrutinized in their reviews by that agency. So there's an overall, I think, collaborative approach being incorporated here to try to understand how can we free up not only the small businesses, but also the other institutions and organizations that are vital in supporting them, especially in the current environment with regard to access to capital. So I think we're going to continue to see more of that leniency, availability, flexibility. from the perspective of the lending community as well as from SBA directly.
Mark, thank you. We've got a number of more questions for you, and I think we'll come back on the back end here after we get to our next few speakers, and certainly a lot of interest in the programs that you're offering. I'm very excited to also say that we're joined here by Nick Demerice. He is with the Employment Securities Division at the state of Washington, which, if you don't know, is in charge of a number of the programs that operate in the state to help workers, from our unemployment programs to our paid family and sick leave programs. And they are probably some of the busiest people in state government right now. And so Nick has been with ESD for, comes from the Northwest Seaport Alliance, I believe. And so it's good to have him down with the Employment Securities Division, especially with how hard at work they are right now trying to get resources to employees that need it. Nick, are you with us?
I am, and I've been having some bandwidth issues today, so I'm going to try to do audio only if that's okay, and let me know if I break up at all. So thank you for that introduction. I have been with Employment Security since October. Before that, I came from the Northwest Seaport Alliance, and before that, spent 10 years with the State Department of Commerce. So I've been in and around a lot of these issues for quite some time. You're absolutely right. The unemployment, or the Employment Security Department is very active right now. Obviously, we run the unemployment program, which I'll talk a little bit more about, as well as the paid family medical leave program, which doesn't have a significant impact that we're seeing right now, but there may be future impacts as we get further into this situation. So a little bit about what we're doing around unemployment insurance. We have done a number of things, including starting a web page that we deployed a week and a half ago, which was really intended to be an outline for both businesses and individuals as to how they could interact with the unemployment insurance program, as well as other ESD programs, really trying to highlight for employers specifically the benefits of programs like shared work, which is an opportunity for an employer to reduce the number of hours of their employees while not separating fully from them. And then that balance of hours we can then make up for partially with partial wage replacement through unemployment insurance, as well as the tool of standby. And standby is where an employer can temporarily lay off their employees, knowing full well that they're going to re-engage them after a temporary layoff period. That tool has become increasingly important, particularly with the impacts to the retail and service industry that we've seen in the last several days with the orders that have gone out. We are very, very busy. We are releasing numbers today that are about a week old, but last week we saw 15,000 new claims for unemployment insurance. We are going to be able to show significant uptick from that. That in and of itself is a 150% increase from the previous week. We are going to see massive increase above and beyond those numbers for the current week when they are released next week. In terms of anecdotal evidence for that, I can tell you that we, on Tuesday, we received 19,000 phone calls to our claim centers. We have 2 claim centers, one in Lacey and one in Spokane. Our website also saw an average of 280,000 hits the first 3 days of this week. We tend to average about 15,000. So there is tremendous demand. We continue to see that grow, and we believe we will be right at the center of this for quite some time. In addition to that, last week, we adopted some emergency rules that the governor announced. A couple of those were really focused on increasing flexibility for unemployment insurance to be able to pay people while in quarantine, as well as the ability for employers and employees to utilize standby for part-time employees. Again, that has become increasingly important to the workforce with the announcements and the closures this week. In the heaviest hit industry sectors, there are a lot of part-time employees. Standby is a great tool additionally because we are able to waive the work search requirements for employees who are currently on standby. And then we have also, through those emergency rules, have created some benefit charge relief for employers if they utilize standby for this period of time. We also adopted via rule some flexibility in our requirements around reporting and late fees. We understand that everybody's being impacted by this right now, and we don't want to be fining people for missing filing deadlines and so on and so forth. In addition to unemployment insurance, well, actually related to unemployment insurance, then the governor announced in a press conference yesterday with our commissioner, Susie Levine, that we are going to waive the waiting week. Unemployment insurance in our state for pretty much, as long as anyone can remember, has had a waiting week. That means that you don't get paid for the first week that you're unemployed and separated from your employer. We're going to waive that and start paying in week 1 of an unemployment claim to be able to get money in people's hands faster. Additionally, the governor is requesting the federal government consider passing and enacting what's called a DUA, that is the Disaster Unemployment Assistance Program. This would require an act of Congress as well as the president to declare a natural disaster. The benefit of this is it opens up unemployment assistance to a lot of individuals who don't currently qualify. So for instance, individuals who do not have the requisite 680 hours in their base year, which is a prerequisite for accessing unemployment insurance, or individuals who are self-employed. We are hearing a lot from folks who are self-employed, small business owners, or independent contractors who typically do not qualify for unemployment insurance, that they are in quite a pinch right now. And so we are asking the federal government to enact a DUA and calling on the administration to also declare that natural disaster relief. Additionally, that frees up FEMA dollars and disaster relief dollars to be able to pay these unemployment claims as opposed to our state unemployment trust fund. I'll mention briefly paid family medical leave. That program has launched to tremendous demand and success. You've probably seen about it in the news. It has been incredibly popular. We received in the first 2 months of the program 36,000 applications. That's more than half than we expected for the entire first year. So we are a little bit behind on the processing of those applications, but we are making through that through several mitigation steps. PFML will likely not have a major impact on people who become mildly ill or need to miss work due to a mild illness from COVID-19. However, individuals who become seriously ill requiring hospitalization or to be out of work because they are ill for more than a week could avail themselves of paid family medical leave. Additionally, yesterday, we announced that we would be in partnership with our Workforce Development Center partners, closing all the work source centers in Washington State and going to a virtual model. This was really intended to be a way to keep the public and our employees safe. All those services are available in a virtual way, and we do have staff working in some of those centers. They are just no longer open to the public for the time being. We have also done a pretty significant reprioritization of staff toward the unemployment program and the paid family medical leave program, and really trying to get to a place where we are leveraging every available resource. We have also asked for assistance from other agencies and have been receiving that, as well as we are hiring. We are one of the few places that tends to ramp up significant hiring during an economic downturn or an economic crisis. And as I mentioned, we have call centers in both Lacey and Spokane that we have more than 100 positions advertised out for right now. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
That's extraordinary information, and we know that everybody in the East is working really hard right now. You could go ahead and mute just really quick while I ask the question here. That'd be helpful. Couple of quick questions. With regard to the way that unemployment is funded, and for folks on the line that may not be familiar with the program, there's a rating system for different companies based on how much their employees have had to utilize the program and their layoffs and things like that. Is there an expectation that the fund can absorb this in the short run? Is there going to be an ask for the state legislature to step in with additional resources? Or is this just such a mammoth issue that the hope is that there'll be significant federal dollars that will backfill the program without having to increase rates on employers?
I appreciate that question. I think the answer is probably too soon to tell. I will say part of the money that was just passed by the legislature to deal with the COVID crisis included $25 million, really intended at offsetting benefits charge increases to small businesses and employers that are affected by COVID. So we really need to be able to see what happens and evolves over the next several weeks to figure out what the impacts will be. But we do want to be thoughtful, particularly to employers who are being impacted by COVID and having to lay off and separate from workforce, to not hit them with onerous charges over time.
Just another reminder, we'll be putting all the links that we're talking about today, both in the chat section here in Zoom, as well as on our website at the conclusion of the webinar. We're also recording this webinar, and so we'll be rebroadcasting it, putting on our Facebook page and on our website, as well as all the other upcoming webinars that we have. And finally, we've got some poll questions. So if you would like to give us a little feedback about how you and your company are handling this issue and how your employees are doing, we'd love to have you participate in some of the polls that we've launched here. Another question for you at Employment Securities Division. What's the time frame, just like the question that we posed to Mark, what's the time frame for folks when they're either applying for unemployment benefits or also when they are applying for the shared work program? How long until they're receiving benefits?
Yeah, I appreciate that. The good news about unemployment insurance in particular is that it is a very mature program with a lot of automation. We've invested heavily in technology over the last decade to really make that system work as fast as possible. We did see a 500 shared work applications from employers last week over what we received the year before, and so we are seeing significant demand, which is slowing down that determination process by a few days. But we are mobilizing more people to that as fast as possible. Once we are able to make determinations against individual applications, folks tend to get paid through a pretty automated process. If they file a claim on Sunday, funds usually arrive in their account by Tuesday or Wednesday, assuming there aren't big issues with their claim.
One of the big issues that we're dealing with right now in the small business world is that there are a lot of folks that are self-employed and that may or may not have been paying into some of these programs. What kind of support is out there for independent contractors and individuals that are self-employed?
It's a great question. One we're hearing very regularly through all the social media channels. And I mentioned the DUA, the federal designation that could open up unemployment insurance for small businesses or self-employed individuals or independent contractors. We also created a pretty handy grid for a number of situations that individuals may find themselves in and what programs from employer-paid sick leave all the way through workers' comp they may qualify for. And we continue to find holes in that net, if you will, and small business, self-employed individuals and independent contractors continue to be a group of folks that just we don't have a whole lot of resources to be able to bring to them. What I have been able to tell a lot of independent contractors in particular is everybody's work history is different, and as we are calculating base wages in people's base year, you need to meet a certain number, which is 680 hours over the previous year. We can't adjust that and look back up to a year and a half before a claim date. And so if you really worked for any employer within the last 18 months, you can part-time work annualized. So we encourage folks to apply if they think they may be close to that number, and all employers, not just one.
Thank you very much, Nick. That's great information. We've got a few more questions that we'll get for you on the back end, but I do want to get to our final guest today, who is Thomas Mayo. He is the district representative for Congressman Adam Smith. We have heard a lot of these conversations from all of the different agency representatives here today, that a lot of these questions all seem to point back to the federal level and the federal response. So it's great to have you with us, Thomas, and we'd love to hear how the federal government is responding at this time, particularly as it affects the citizens of Washington State.
Certainly, and hi everyone. Thank you all for having me here and allowing me the opportunity to speak with you today. And thank you, Joe, for putting this forum on and giving us the opportunity to speak with the small businesses and the people of Washington who are really being impacted right now. I want to give you a brief overview of the most recent action taken by Congress, which is the Families First Corona Response Act. That was a bipartisan bill that passed through Congress and was signed into law by President Trump, which expands family and medical leave as well as guaranteed paid sick leave for certain U.S. workers. This bill is going to take effect on April 2nd, and it will sunset on December 31st, 2020. And I also want to kind of give you a sense of what we feel might be coming next on the federal side of things. This is currently likely to only be one part of the federal response to really an unprecedented situation here. So with regards to the Families First Act, this is going to expand access to emergency paid sick leave to as many as 87 million U.S. workers. Many of these workers currently have no paid leave and are being forced to choose between their paychecks, their health, and the health of the people around them. We view this as a critical step towards protecting families' financial security and mitigating the spread of COVID-19. A vast majority of these workers would receive full pay for 2 weeks or 80 hours of missed work that is related to COVID-19. While 89% of large private sector employees already offer paid leave, many small and medium-sized employers do not. This bipartisan bill provides emergency paid sick leave to the workers who are least likely to have it. We've seen that many large employers, including Walmart, McDonald's, Apple's, and others have already updated and strengthened their paid sick leave policies in response. It's important to note, however, that the employers will be paid back. They will be fully reimbursed for the cost in no more than 3 months. We believe this will benefit small businesses by helping them keep their workers healthy without taking any additional costs. The way in which this will work is that employers can claim a quarterly tax credit against the payroll taxes for payments for sick days and family and medical leave up to an amount that does not exceed the business's total payroll taxes paid in the quarter. That's kind of and I know I said a lot there, but that's an overview of what this looks like. And as I mentioned previously, we kind of view this as the first step that was aimed at protecting individuals and families in case they are sick or have to provide care for a family member who is suffering from COVID-19 and didn't otherwise have any sort of protection. However, what we are hearing is that there are talks that are quickly coming together with regards to possible stimulus packages and funding mechanisms that would be more aimed at small businesses. We don't have any text of the bill yet. We don't have any versions of it. I was speaking with our DC office this morning in preparation for the call this afternoon. We don't have any text of it just yet, but my understanding is that it's going to be aimed more towards small businesses. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions anyone has.
Thanks, Thomas. I've got a lot of folks that are asking, and it might be a question for you or possibly for the council member, but there's a lot of questions about the availability of testing. Where are the drive-through center locations? What is the federal response to increasing the supply of tests to local hospitals and local jurisdictions? Are we getting over the lack of testing hump? And do you have anything that you can offer in terms of when those will become more available to the mass?
Well, I'm happy to provide some resources that I can share that can be dispersed as far as what the overall response is. We know that we have to do more. I know the University of Washington is ramping up their testing, and I understand that there's I believe it's a field office a field hospital in Shoreline that's being constructed currently. So I know that there's being things that are being ramped up. With regards to the shortage, I know it's a problem. I know that we are continuing to push for more and more testings, and also the drive-through testing that you mentioned. That's something that we need to do, and I know that we're continuing to ramp up in that regard.
Are there any small businesses or entities that are contemplated to be excluded from the Families First Act, or is it a fairly blanket with not a lot of qualifications to be able to access? So it's employers with less than 500 employees. There are exceptions that can be made. My understanding is that with less than 50 employees, exemptions can be had by the Secretary of Labor can make those exemptions if it's going to have if it's going to cause a hardship on the business. Yes. Thank you so much, Thomas. Those are great information for folks on the line, and certainly more to come. And I think we'll probably be asking each of you to come back and join us for a future conversation, as there's so much that develops every single day. Hoping the rest of our panel is still with us, because we've got a number of questions that have come in that I think we can pass off to folks. One in particular, just around the swirling information about lockdowns and shelter in place and things like that. Councilmember Balducci, are you hearing anything either from the governor's office or from the executive office about, is that something that we're headed towards? And how do the rules that we're currently under here in King County and throughout the state of Washington differ from what we're hearing out of New York, San Francisco, and for that matter, Italy?
I'm sorry, Joe, can you state the beginning of the question again?
Sure, no problem. Just wondering about what comes next from a prevention standpoint. Is it shelter in place? Is it what we're seeing in some jurisdictions across the United States and the world?
Yeah, so I'm sure that the folks the public health people are on a daily basis reviewing whether our response is continuing to be the right level. There's a level system that they refer to, and we're currently in level 4 of 5. So, and it depends on if the spread continues. If spread continues despite all the social isolation and the, pretty draconian shutdowns that we're seeing, then they will have to look to the next step of a total shelter in place like we've seen in other places. So it's certainly something that they look at each day as they see what's happening with the cases, and the case numbers go up each day. Sorry, I can't give you more of a preview than that, but I think we should expect that it gets harder for a while before it gets easier.
And is King County taking the lead in testing? Obviously, we've seen King County step in with some of the shelter services that they're providing and some of the pop-up hospitals. What is King County Public Health doing in terms of getting access to testing and expanding the use of the drive-through testing that we've heard about and seen on the news?
So the real issue with testing was that originally it was extremely constrained as to who could control and perform the testing. And over time, that wasn't working. And then it was being sort of metered based on availability. There were just not enough testing capacity. And bringing in other organizations like the University of Washington that has really upped our game in testing has helped, but we still don't have the level of testing available to us that we have been expecting from the CDC. And so while I know that there's a huge push to make testing much more available, I don't know that the reality is going to meet the expectations. And I'll say this, one thing that happens as the virus spreads more and with the peculiar nature of this infection is most people who get it, who are young and healthy, will get mild to moderately sick and treat at home and be fine as if they've had a bout of a virus or the flu. It's those that are in their high-risk groups or who get a particularly heavy viral load for whom this is just deadly. And so I think that we need to start thinking about the fact that if I start to feel sick, even if my symptoms match, I should call my doctor and maybe not expect to be tested. I might be told to just stay home and take care of myself. And going back to my earlier point about everything we do should be focused on not overburdening the healthcare system, because if it gets overburdened, that's the worst case scenario. So that's what I know about testing.
Kind of got a question that I want to throw out to each of you. We talked a little bit about how different entities are doing outreach, and most of what we're hearing about is about these great technologies that we're using, like this webinar here today. What are we doing to cross that digital divide and reach either the communities and the small businesses that don't have an online business model or don't have these resources, or the families, and particularly some vulnerable communities, communities of color, others that don't have a lot of these tools and technologies? What are we able to do in a kind of semi-quarantine situation to provide outreach, resources, and information to them? Mark, maybe you want to take a stab at that one on how the Small Business Administration has been reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. I guess it's obviously a great question, and the one thing I guess that we're hoping for anyway is we've got a pretty extensive network, and so to the extent that we can work consistently in communicating with our network we're hopeful, and whether that's, you know, virtually or not, we're hopeful that they would, those members of the community, of their communities, are going to be able to make those connections to the folks that are a little bit farther removed from maybe some of the mainstream media connectivity and things like that. I don't know if that makes sense. Example might be some of the ethnic chambers of commerce that we're certainly in communication with on a regular basis. You know, our hope is that they're going to be able to, on a more one-on-one level, reach out to and communicate with the small businesses in those areas.
Thank you. Councilmember, was there anything in particular that the county has been able to do to provide outreach and resources in some of those harder to digitally reach communities?
Our focus at this point has really been on making sure we're getting to communities to talk about our response to the epidemic itself. And your members may not be aware, but King County doesn't have much of an economic development office or a business support function, really. And that might be something we could talk about at a different time. But what we're doing now is, as I said, we put about $1 million into our emergency response to have people who are able to go out and talk to folks. That becomes more difficult in a face-to-face way now, of course, but that includes we've heard from small business owners, we've heard from community organizations and individuals. And so we're trying to send people out into those communities that have the hardest time communicating generally because they are underserved, disadvantaged, disconnected, or just have language barriers. So I assume that we will pick up support to some small businesses in that way, but that's the focus of our efforts at this time.
Thank you, Council Member. We're just about up with our time here today for the webinar. I want to remind everyone that you can email us, staff@bellevuechamber.org, to ask any questions. We're going to take a look at some of the questions that came in that we didn't get a chance to answer during the course of this webinar and respond to folks that provided us their email and contact information. We will be putting all of the information that we've received here today, as well as a live broadcast or a rebroadcast of this webinar, on our website, bellevuechamber.org. And of course, I want to remind folks to go there and check out the resources that are available. And again, many of these organizations that we're referencing here today can be found there. And then finally, we want to invite you to participate in our future webinars on a whole host of topics that we will be rolling out here in the weeks ahead. This obviously is a great technology. We had well over 200 participants that were able to join us here today. And I think it was really a lot of great information. And I owe that all to wonderful staff here at the Bellevue Chamber, and certainly to our 4 panelist participants. Thank you very much. Have a great and safe day. Good luck with each of your work, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, everyone.